My dad left me as a kid, scammed me as an adult, stalked me from jail, threatened my mother, lied to the court, and now he wants to come to my wedding. I was 7 when my parents started fighting all the time. Doors slamming, glass breaking, everything. But 2 years later, when they finally separated, 9-year-old me still couldn't understand why. I soon realized that the divorce was probably my fault. I wish I could say I grew out of this thinking, but I didn't. Every time I heard my mom crying alone at night, I thought it was because of me. Every time I heard her on the phone talking about how heartbroken she was, I thought it was because of me. So I did what any 9-year-old would do. I tried to win my dad back. I remember sitting by the front door every Friday, clutching my backpack like a boy clings to a raft in a flood, too small to stop the current, but too hopeful to let go. For the first few months, he was always on time, and I'd tell him about every A that I got in class and the delicious meals that mom had cooked that week. But instead of turning the car around and getting back together with my mom, he'd just give a weak smile and try to change the topic. Except I never gave up, until he did. First he was 1 hour late, the next week it was 2. Then one day, he just never showed up. That night, I ended up sleeping on the icy wooden floor beside the front door. I woke up that morning in tears, asking mom why daddy hated me. She gave me a big hug and reassured me that he must be sick or something. For a while, that was enough explanation, until later that day. How could you leave our son waiting? While you were doing all sorts of crap with that blonde beach, our son was sleeping on the floor waiting for dad who never came. I rushed into the kitchen and begged my mom to hang up the phone, to stop yelling at my dad, that I was sorry. She immediately hung up the phone and grabbed me. She carried me over to the living room couch, looked me in the eye, and told me it wasn't my fault. None of it was. This should have been a sweet, convincing moment, but it wasn't, because I still wanted to win him back. So that weekend, I waited again. He was on time, and I was ready to hatch my master plan. A drawing of our family portrait in my right pocket, a photo from their wedding in my left. But when we got to the house, my plan was ruined, because sitting inside was the blonde-haired woman my mom was talking about. I recognized her from a few years back, when my dad brought me into work for the day. I knew she was his assistant. I sheepishly waved and asked if she was replacing mommy. She scoffed and rolled her eyes, and my dad made the shh sound with his finger over his mouth. And just when I thought the surprises were over, a boy my age ran around the corner. Hi. He went to hug me, but I turned away. Apparently, he was the blonde woman's son that my father was helping raise. I stormed up the stairs to my room and slammed the door so hard the wood almost broke. No one came to find me. I curled up on the floor and cried so hard my ears started ringing. After a few hours, my mom came to pick me up. After that, I never wanted to see my dad again. Not even because of my betrayal, but because the pain of feeling like I'd failed him was too much. So I stopped waiting by the door, and my mom slowly built us a quite successful life without him. I ended up beating the single parent statistic and went to college to become a lawyer. But even when I graduated and started making $100,000 a year, I still felt like there was always that missing part of me that wanted the fatherly approval I never had. It was a void nothing could fill. So I did what I had to do. I reached out and asked if he wanted to come over for Thanksgiving. He only replied a week later, after I sent my address, in a wealthy part of town. That should have been my first red flag, but it wasn't. Instead, I felt this childlike excitement when he was on the way over. It was like I was a child sitting by the door again, except this time, he would actually show up. "Son, do you got any cash for me?" is the first thing he said when I welcomed him in. My heart dropped a little, but I handed him a $100 note anyway. "Thanks, son. I knew you weren't as selfish as your mother." He said it with a wink and a smile, as if it was the most agreeable sentence he's ever said. I forced a laugh, not wanting to start an argument, and offered him a cup of tea. Suddenly, the words poured out of me. Every update from middle school, high school, my current girlfriend, radio silence. You could have heard a pin drop, until I mentioned my job. "How much are you making, son?" "I earn 100K because—" "Wow," he interrupted. "Son, I hope you're not giving any of it to that greedy mother of yours. My family sure could use some dough." My head tilted the same way a puppy tilts at its owner. I didn't even say anything. I just wanted him to realize how stupid he sounded, but he never did. And this time, instead of tears, I felt anger. The memories came flooding. All the times he made my mom cry. All the times he made me feel worthless for starting a new family when he wasn't even finished with the old one. I didn't say anything for several seconds, just staring at him while he looked at me with those expectant eyes, like I was supposed to open my wallet and hand over my hard-earned money to a man who couldn't even be bothered to show up for visitation days. "I'm not giving you money," I finally said. His face changed instantly. The fake smile disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Come on, son. Don't be like that. I'm your father," he said, leaning forward. "Family helps family." I almost laughed. "Family? You want to talk about family now?" He must have realized his mistake because he quickly backpedaled. Told me he'd been going through some tough times lately, lost his job, had some health issues. The blonde woman, whose name was apparently Tiffany, had left him a few years back and taken her son with her. He was all alone now and really needed my help. I'd like to say I was smart enough to see through it all, but part of me, that stupid little kid part that was still sitting by the door, wanted to believe him. I ended up writing him a check for $500. He promised to pay me back once he got back on his feet. I knew I'd never see that money again, even as I was signing the check. After he left, which happened about 30 seconds after the check was in his pocket, I sat in my living room feeling like an idiot. I called my girlfriend Jordan and told her what happened. She came right over with takeout and listened while I vented. "You know you're never getting that money back, right?" she said. I nodded. We'd been dating for 3 years at that point, and she knew all about my dad issues. She was always telling me I needed therapy to deal with my abandonment trauma, as she called it. I thought that would be the end of it. Dad got his money. I got a reminder of why we didn't have a relationship. Everyone moves on. But 3 days later, he called me, said he needed a place to stay for just a night or two while he sorted some things out. I told him I'd think about it and hung up. I definitely didn't want him staying with me, but I also felt guilty saying no. Classic me. I didn't call him back, hoping he'd take the hint. He didn't. He showed up at my apartment building the next evening with a duffel bag. The security guard called up to let me know someone was there to see me. When I got downstairs, Dad looked rough, unshaven, clothes wrinkled, that desperate look in his eyes. He launched into this story about how his landlord had kicked him out for being late on rent, and he just needed a place to crash until he could get his security deposit back from the crook who owned his building. I reluctantly let him come up to my apartment, set him up on the couch with some blankets and a pillow, told him he could stay for 2 nights max. He thanked me profusely, even hugged me, which felt weird since I couldn't remember the last time we'd had any physical contact. That night I couldn't sleep, kept thinking I heard him moving around the apartment. At one point I got up to check and found him in my home office, just standing there in the dark. "What are you doing?" I asked. He jumped like I'd caught him doing something wrong, claimed he was looking for the bathroom, which made no sense since I'd shown him where it was earlier, and it was in the opposite direction. I pointed him back to the living room and watched until he actually went there. In the morning, I got ready for work while he was still sleeping on the couch. I locked my office door before leaving, telling myself I was being paranoid but doing it anyway. I texted Jordan about what happened, and she offered to come check on things during her lunch break since she worked closer to my place than I did. Around noon, Jordan called me. "Your dad's not here," she said. "The apartment's empty." I felt relieved but also confused. Maybe he found another place to stay. Maybe, she said, but she sounded uncertain. "But your office door's open." I definitely remembered locking it. "Check my desk," I said. "Top right drawer." There was a pause. "It's open too, and empty. That's where I kept my checkbook and some emergency cash. About $200 was missing, plus several blank checks." I called the bank immediately to cancel the account, then left work early to go file a police report. The officer who took my statement seemed bored. Told me theft between family members was a civil matter, unless I could prove he'd forced his way in. Since I'd invited him to stay, there wasn't much they could do. He suggested I try to contact my father directly to resolve things. I tried calling, but his phone went straight to voicemail. I left a message telling him I knew what he'd done and demanding he return my property. Then I spent the rest of the day contacting my credit card companies and putting fraud alerts on my accounts. 2 days later, my bank called. Someone had tried to cash a check for $5,000 from my account. The teller had been suspicious because the signature didn't match mine, and the account had already been flagged. They'd turned the person away, but kept the fraudulent check as evidence. I went to the bank to give a statement and look at their security footage. Sure enough, there was my dad trying to cash a check he'd stolen from me. I took still images from the footage to the police station and filed another report. This time, they took it more seriously since I had evidence of actual check fraud. A week went by with no word from or about my dad. I was starting to think he'd skipped town when I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was a woman named Barbara, who identified herself as my dad's current girlfriend. "Your father's been arrested," she told me. Apparently, the check fraud at my bank wasn't his first attempt. He'd successfully cashed several fraudulent checks at other banks, using accounts that belonged to other people, including Barbara. When the police picked him up, he had fake IDs and stolen checkbooks from at least 3 different people. Barbara wanted to know if I was going to help him out. I asked what she meant. "With bail money," she said, like it was obvious. "He's your father." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "He stole from me too," I told her. "He's on his own." She called me some choice names before hanging up. I blocked her number immediately. The district attorney's office contacted me a few days later. They wanted me to testify against my dad as one of his victims. I agreed without hesitation. Part of me felt guilty, that same part that used to wait by the door, but I pushed it aside. He'd made his choices. The pretrial hearing was set for a month later. In the meantime, my dad started calling me from jail. I didn't accept the charges for the first few calls, but eventually curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to hear what possible excuse he could have. "Son, you've got to help me," he said immediately. "These people in here are animals. I don't belong here." I remained silent, letting him dig himself deeper. "Look, I know I messed up. I was desperate, but you're doing great. You can afford to help your old man out. What's a few $1,000s to someone like you?" Still, I said nothing. "Hello? Are you there?" he asked. "Listen, if you help me get out of here, I swear I'll pay you back. Double. I've got some business opportunities lined up that are going to be huge." "Like what?" I finally asked. He launched into this elaborate story about some investors he'd met who needed help moving money from overseas accounts. All he needed was a small stake to get started. Classic scam stuff that probably would have worked on me a month ago because I wanted so badly to believe he could change. "I'm not bailing you out," I said, "and I'm testifying against you at the hearing." He exploded. Started yelling that I was ungrateful, that he'd given me life, that I owed him everything. Called me every name in the book. I hung up while he was still ranting. The calls kept coming after that. Sometimes he'd be angry. Other times he'd try to guilt trip me by talking about how sick he was or how dangerous jail was for a man his age. Once he even pretended to be crying, talking about how he'd always loved me and just made some mistakes. I stopped accepting the calls altogether. Changed my phone number just to be sure. The day of the hearing arrived. I put on my best suit and headed to the courthouse. Jordan came with me for moral support. We sat in the hallway waiting for them to call my name, my stomach in knots. I hadn't seen my dad in person since the night he stayed at my apartment. When they finally called me in, I walked past my dad sitting at the defense table. He looked smaller somehow, in his orange jumpsuit. He tried to catch my eye, but I kept my gaze straight ahead. I testified about what happened, how he'd asked for money, stayed at my apartment, stolen my checkbook, and attempted to forge checks in my name. The prosecutor showed the bank footage. It was all very straightforward. When it was the defense attorney's turn to cross-examine me, he tried to suggest I had given my dad permission to use my checks. I shut that down immediately. Then came the personal attacks. "Isn't it true that you've harbored resentment toward your father since your parents' divorce?" he asked. "Objection. Relevance," the prosecutor said before I could answer. "I'm establishing the witness's bias, Your Honor," the defense attorney argued. The judge allowed it, so I had to answer. "I was disappointed when my father abandoned our family. Yes. And isn't it possible that this case is just another way for you to punish your father for leaving?" I took a deep breath. "This case exists because my father stole from me and committed fraud. My feelings about my childhood have nothing to do with those facts." The defense attorney tried a few more angles, but eventually gave up. As I left the witness stand, my dad mouthed, "Please help me," with his pathetic look on his face. I walked past him without acknowledging it. The judge found enough evidence to proceed to trial, but that was scheduled for several months away. My dad was denied bail due to being a flight risk with his history of using false identification. I thought that would be the end of my involvement until the trial, but a week later, I got another call from an unknown number. This time it was my half-brother, the blonde woman's son. His name was Thomas, and he was 28 now, my age. "I heard about what happened with Dad," he said. His voice was deeper than I expected. "I'm not calling to defend him or anything. I just thought maybe we could meet up sometime." I was suspicious at first, thinking maybe my dad had put him up to contacting me, but Thomas seemed genuine. He told me he hadn't had any contact with our dad in years either, not since his mom finally left him when Thomas was 16. "He pulled the same crap with us," Thomas said. "Always asking for money, making promises he never kept, disappearing for weeks at a time. We agreed to meet for coffee that weekend. It was weird sitting across from someone who looked vaguely like me around the eyes and had experienced the same type of paternal disappointment. We ended up talking for hours, filling in the gaps of each other's stories. He used to tell me you didn't want to see him anymore," Thomas said. "That you chose your mom over him and refused to visit." I snorted. "He told me he was helping to raise you like it was some noble sacrifice he was making." We both laughed at how ridiculous it all was. Thomas had turned out okay despite everything. He was an electrician, married with a baby on the the way. We exchanged numbers and promised to stay in touch, which we actually did. Meanwhile, my dad started writing me letters from jail since I'd blocked his calls. The first few I threw away unopened, but curiosity got the better of me eventually. His letters were all the same, asking for money for his commissary account, complaining about jail conditions, and promising to make everything up to me if I would just help him this one time. Then his tone changed. The next letter included thinly veiled threats about what would happen if I testified against him at the trial. He mentioned my address, Jordan's workplace, even my mom's business. It was clearly meant to intimidate me. I took the letter to the prosecutor, who added witness intimidation to the charges against him. His defense attorney dropped him after that, and he was assigned a public defender. As the trial date approached, I started getting anonymous phone calls, heavy breathing, then hanging up. Once, someone just said, "We know where you live," and disconnected. I installed a security system and made sure Jordan was never alone at my apartment. The prosecutor thought it might be one of my dad's jail buddies trying to scare me off from testifying. They offered to put me in a hotel under an assumed name for the week of the trial, but I refused. I wasn't going to let him intimidate me. 2 days before the trial, Barbara, my dad's girlfriend, showed up at my office. She made it past reception by claiming to be a client in distress. When I came out to the waiting area, she started screaming about how I was destroying her life by sending my father to prison. Security escorted her out, but not before she spat in my direction and yelled that I would regret this. I filed for a restraining order that same day. The trial itself was anticlimactic. My dad took a plea deal at the last minute. 3 years for fraud and attempted witness intimidation, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. I didn't have to testify after all. I thought that would be the end of it. But my dad managed to get a message to me through his public defender. He wanted to see me before they transferred him to state prison. Against my better judgment and Jordan's explicit advice, I agreed to one visit. The visitation room was depressing. All concrete and plastic chairs bolted to the floor. My dad shuffled in wearing handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit. He looked older than his 55 years. His face gaunt and eyes hollow. "Thanks for coming," he said as he sat down across from me. "I wasn't sure you would." "What do you want?" I asked. I wasn't in the mood for small talk. He sighed heavily. "I want to apologize. I know I messed up. With you, with Thomas, with everything." I didn't respond. I'd heard his apologies before, usually right before he asked for something. "I've had time to think in here," he continued, "about all the ways I failed you as a father, about why I left in the first place." That caught my attention. He'd never talked about why he left before. "Your mother and I were having problems long before we split up," he said. "But instead of working on them, I took the coward's way out, found someone who didn't know all my flaws yet. Then I did the same thing to her eventually." He looked up at me. "But the worst thing I did was making you think it was your fault somehow. It was never about you. You were the best part of my life, and I threw that away because I was too selfish and too scared to be the man you needed me to be." I felt tears threatening but blinked them back. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I'm facing real consequences for the first time in my life," he said, and I realized I might never get another chance to tell you the truth. For a moment, I almost believed him, almost thought this might be a genuine turning point. Then he ruined it. "I was hoping maybe you could put some money in my commissary account," he said, "just enough for some decent food and a few comforts. The state doesn't provide much." And there it was. I stood up. "Wait," he said quickly. "That's not why I asked you here. I really did want to apologize." "No, you wanted to soften me up so I'd give you money," I said. "Same as always." "That's not true," he protested, but his eyes gave him away. They always darted to the left when he was lying. I'd noticed it as a kid but forgotten until this moment. "Goodbye, Dad," I said. I turned to signal the guard I was finished. "Wait," he called after me. "I know where your mother keeps her emergency money, in that ceramic duck in the kitchen. We could split it if you just—" I didn't hear the rest because the door closed behind me. I walked out of that jail and didn't look back. That night, I called my mom. We hadn't talked about my dad in years, an unspoken agreement between us. But now, I needed to. "He tried to get me to steal your emergency money," I told her after explaining everything else. She laughed. "I haven't kept money in that duck since we were married." I knew he knew about it. We talked for hours that night. About the divorce, about how hard she'd worked to give me a good life, about all the times my dad had disappointed me that she didn't even know about. It was cathartic, like lancing a wound that had been festering for decades. "You know," she said before we hung up, "I used to blame myself for how he treated you. I thought if I'd just tried harder to make the marriage work, you wouldn't have gone through all that pain. It wasn't your fault," I said automatically. "No, it wasn't," she agreed. "Just like it wasn't yours. Some people are just broken, honey, and no amount of love can fix them if they don't want to be fixed." Those words hit me hard. All those years I'd spent thinking I could somehow earn my dad's love if I was just good enough, successful enough, generous enough. But the problem had never been me. It had been him all along. The next day, I called a therapist and made an appointment. Jordan had been right. I had some serious abandonment issues to work through. But for the first time, I felt like maybe I could actually heal instead of just carrying around the weight of my father's rejection. Thomas and I kept meeting for coffee every few weeks. It was strange having a half-brother after being an only child for so long, but also nice. We bonded over our shared experiences with our dad, but also discovered we had other things in common. A love of old sci-fi movies, the same weird habit of organizing our sock drawers by color, a talent for remembering useless trivia. 6 months into my dad's sentence, we got word that he'd been caught running a small-time con inside the prison, convincing other inmates to give him their phone privileges in exchange for legal advice he wasn't qualified to give. His parole possibility was revoked. Thomas and I met up after hearing the news. We weren't surprised, but it still hurt somehow. "Do you think he'll ever change?" Thomas asked me over his coffee. I thought about it for a minute. "No," I finally said. "I don't think he can." Thomas nodded. "Me neither. I used to wish he would, but now I just feel sorry for him." That was exactly it. Somewhere along the way, my desperate need for my father's approval had transformed into pity for a man who would never know what it meant to truly love someone else more than himself. As if reading my thoughts, Thomas raised his coffee cup in a mock toast. "To moving on," he said. I clinked my cup against his. "To moving on." And for the first time in my life, I truly felt like I could. The trial came and went. Dad got sentenced to 5 years with possibility of parole after 3. I thought that would be the end of it. But life is never that simple, especially when you've got a manipulative father who refuses to accept responsibility. About 4 months into his sentence, I got a letter from the prison chaplain. Apparently, my dad had been attending regular services and had found God or whatever. The chaplain thought it might be healing for both of us if I came to visit. I showed the letter to my therapist during our weekly session. "What do you think?" she asked me, in that non-committal therapist way. "I think it's BS," I said immediately. "He's working some angle. He always is." She nodded. "That's certainly possible. But what if he's not? Would you regret not giving him one more chance?" I hated hated that question. The answer was complicated. Part of me, the grown-up, rational part, knew my dad was a lost cause, but that stupid little kid part that used to wait by the door with his backpack, that part kept whispering what if in my ear. I decided to go, but I had rules. I wouldn't bring money. I wouldn't agree to anything during the visit, and I'd leave the second he started his usual manipulation tactics. When visitation day came, Jordan offered to drive me. She waited in the car while I went inside the grim concrete building. The guards processed me through security like I was the criminal. They made me empty my pockets, patted me down, and led me to a room with rows of tables divided by low partitions. I sat there for 15 minutes before they brought my dad in. Prison hadn't been kind to him. His hair had gone completely gray, and he'd lost weight. He shuffled more than walked. When he saw me, his face lit up in a way I hadn't seen since I was a little kid. "Son, you came." He tried to hug me, but I stepped back. He didn't seem bothered, just gestured for me to sit. "The chaplain said you wanted to see me," I said, keeping my voice neutral. Yes. I've been doing a lot of thinking in here. A lot of praying, too." He leaned forward. "I've realized how much I've hurt you over the years. I was a terrible father. I put my own selfish needs ahead of yours." I nodded, but didn't say anything. I'd heard versions of this speech before. "I know you probably don't believe me," he continued, "and I don't blame you, but I'm different now. I found my faith, and it's helping me become a better man." I still said nothing. "Anyway, I just wanted to tell you that I'm sorry. For everything. For leaving. For missing your childhood. For trying to take advantage of you when we reconnected. I know sorry doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it anyway." He actually sounded sincere. I felt that familiar, hopeful feeling rising in my chest and immediately squashed it down. "Is that all?" I asked. He looked disappointed at my reaction. "Well, I was hoping we could start talking regularly. Maybe you could visit more often." I shrugged. "Maybe. We'll see. And there's one more thing," he said, his eyes darting to the left. "That old tell. I've been working in the prison library, but it doesn't pay much. If you could put a little money in my commissary account, just for some basic necessities." And there it was. I stood up immediately. "Wait, please don't go," he said quickly. "Forget I asked about the money. That was stupid. Old habits, you know? Please just stay a little longer." I hesitated, then sat back down. "This is exactly why I can't trust you. Everything always comes back to what you can get from me." "You're right," he admitted. "I shouldn't have asked. I'm trying to be better, but I mess up sometimes." We sat in uncomfortable silence for a few moments. Then he asked about my job, my girlfriend, my life in general, surface-level conversation, but he seemed genuinely interested. He didn't interrupt me when I talked, didn't try to one-up my stories or make everything about himself like he used to. At the end of our allotted time, he thanked me for coming. "Even if this is the last time I see you, it means a lot that you gave me this chance," he said. I nodded and left without promising anything. When I got back to the car, Jordan looked at me expectantly. "So, how was it?" she asked. "Weird," I replied. He apologized, then asked for money, then apologized for asking for money. "Classic," Jordan said, rolling her eyes. But then he just talked to me, like a normal person, asked questions and actually listened to the answers. "Do you think he's changed?" I shrugged. "I have no idea. I didn't visit again for 3 months. I thought about it a lot, but couldn't decide if it was worth the emotional energy. Thomas encouraged me to give it a shot. Worst case scenario, he's still the same old con artist and you walk out knowing you tried," he said. So I went back. This time, my dad didn't ask for money at all. We just talked for the full hour about random stuff, books he'd been reading in the prison library, a new case I was working on, Thomas and his family. It was almost normal. After that, I started visiting once a month. Sometimes he'd slip into his old patterns, dropping hints about needing things or trying to play on my sympathy. When that happened, I'd simply end the visit early. He eventually seemed to get the message. Around this time, my mom called with surprising news. "You'll never guess who contacted me," she said. "Who?" "Your father's mother, your Grandma Henderson." I was shocked. I hadn't seen my paternal grandmother since I was a toddler. My dad had cut ties with his parents years before the divorce, over some long-standing family feud I never understood. "What did she want?" I asked. "To meet you," Mom said. "She found me through social media, said she's been trying to track you down for years, but your father wouldn't tell her anything." A week later, I was sitting in a cafe waiting to meet a grandmother I barely remembered. When she walked in, I recognized her immediately. She had the same eyes as my dad, as me. She was in her late 70s but moved with the energy of someone much younger. She hugged me tight when she saw me. "Look at you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "All grown up and so handsome." Over coffee, she told me why my dad had cut off contact with his family. "Your father always had problems with honesty," she said diplomatically. "Even as a child. When he was 20, he borrowed money from your grandfather for what he claimed was tuition. We later found out he'd dropped out of college and spent the money on a car. When they confronted him, he'd blown up, accused them of never supporting him, and stopped speaking to them. Every few years, he'd reach out, usually when he needed something. Then he'd disappear again after they helped him. We tried to maintain a relationship with you and your mother after the divorce," she told me. "But your father blocked us at every turn. Eventually, we had to accept that he didn't want us in your life." I was angry all over again. Not only had my dad abandoned me, but he'd also kept me from knowing my grandparents who actually wanted a relationship with me. The next time I visited him in prison, I brought it up immediately. "I met Grandma Henderson last week," I said. His face changed instantly. "What? How?" "She found Mom on Facebook. Apparently, they've been looking for me for years." He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "They're manipulative people, always judging me, never supporting my dreams." "Funny, that's not how they described it," I replied. "They said you borrowed money for tuition but spent it on a car instead." "That's not," he started, then stopped. "It was complicated." "Was it? Or did you just lie to get what you wanted like you always do?" He looked down at the table. "I was young and stupid. And what about keeping them from seeing me? I grew up thinking I had no extended family who cared about me. I thought I was protecting you," he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. "From what? From people who might have actually shown up when they said they would? Who might have cared about me without wanting something in return?" He had no answer for that. I left that visit early, too angry to continue the conversation. But it was a turning point. I started spending time with my grandmother regularly. Through her, I met aunts, uncles, and cousins I never knew I had. People who welcomed me into their lives without hesitation, who showed me photos of my dad as a kid, told me stories about his childhood, and helped me understand the man he was before he became the father who let me down. 6 months later, Jordan proposed to me. I hadn't been expecting it. We talked about marriage in vague someday. Terms, but she surprised me with a ring after dinner one night at home. No big public gesture, just the two of us in our pajamas on the couch. It was perfect. As we started planning the wedding, the question of whether to invite my dad loomed large. He would still be in prison when the wedding took place, so it was mostly symbolic, but it felt important. I discussed it with Jordan, with my therapist, with Thomas, even with my mom. Everyone had different opinions, but they all said the same thing in the end. "It's your decision." I visited my dad and told him about the engagement. He seemed genuinely happy for me. Then I took a deep breath and said, "I'm not sure if I want you at the wedding, even symbolically." His face fell, but he nodded. "I understand." "Do you? Because I'm not doing this to punish you. This isn't about the past last anymore. Then what is it about? He asked quietly. It's about the fact that a wedding is supposed to be about people who support your relationship and want to see you happy. And I don't know if that's you. I've never been sure if you care about my happiness or just what I can do for you. He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was different somehow, softer. You're right to question that. I haven't given you many reasons to believe I care about you for you. He looked up at me. But I do. Even when I was at my worst, even when I was using you, I still loved you. I just love myself more. It was the most honest thing he'd ever said to me. I won't ask to be at your wedding, he continued. That should be a happy day without any complications. But I hope someday, when I get out of here, I can prove to you that I can be the kind of father who puts you first. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just nodded. The wedding was perfect. We held it in my grandmother's backyard, surrounded by family from both sides. Thomas was my best man. Mom walked me down the aisle, and there wasn't a dry eye in the place when she handed me off to Jordan with a kiss on my cheek. My dad sent a card from prison. No requests, no guilt trips, just congratulations and good wishes. He'd enclosed a small pencil drawing of Jordan and me based on a photo Thomas had shown him. It wasn't half bad. I don't know what will happen when he gets out of prison next year. Maybe he'll slip back into his old patterns. Maybe he'll disappear from my life again. Or maybe, just maybe, he'll actually try to be the father he should have been all along. Either way, I'll be okay. I'm not that little boy waiting by the door anymore. I've built a life filled with people who show up and they say they will, who love me without conditions, who put my happiness on par with their own. And if my dad wants to be part of that life, he'll have to earn it. Not with promises or apologies, but with consistent actions over time. The door isn't locked anymore, but I'm not sitting by it waiting either. I'm living my life, and that's enough.